Hi everybody. My name is Jean-Noé Landry. I'm the Executive Director of Open North. We're based in Montreal, as some of you know, since we've been in touch with you fairly regularly over the last couple of months. We're a nonprofit that specializes in open data and open government and civic technology. And today you've been invited to participate, or to listen in rather, on a webinar that we're going to be giving on understanding the digital capacity of newcomer settlement organizations such as yourselves. Our research objectives for this study were in line with the call for proposal that we responded to from IRCC. So let me just go over these fairly quickly. So to gain a deeper understanding of the digital capacity and needs of service provider organizations, or SPOs, that serve newcomers in Canada, help inform and recommend options for future considerations to support the digital capacity of your sector, and to help fill a gap in evidence significant to policy development in digital capacity era, and obviously to support improvements of digital capacity among SPOs. So I should note that this is the second project that we do with IRCC. We did one last year where they asked us to reach out to a range of different organizations to assess the data needs of SPOs. And so this builds on that research. I invite you to consult our blog post where we highlight key findings from that study in 2016. It's really intended to be kind of a complementary study to the one that we'll be sharing with you today. I've already told you a little bit about Open North. I don't want to go too much into those details, but just to say that, you know, we're Canada's leading nonprofit specialized in open data and civic technology, based in Montreal. We work with a range of different stakeholders. So when we look at open governance and open data in particular, we really take a kind of multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approach to building sustainable and engaging open data ecosystems. So we work as much with the philanthropic sector, with different levels of governments, as well as the private sector and the social sector. So this work really fits in with our desire and our values to support sectors that are looking at data and looking at their capacity from a digital perspective as well. So the methodology, as we move towards the content of the presentation, our methodology here is really intended to kind of show you that first of all, the response rate was quite significant. If we look at the 657 SPOs contacts that we received from IRCC, and I should say that the list that we received from IRCC were mainly settlement service provider, like mainly organizations that had received support through the settlement program of IRCC, we developed a primary data collection tool, as you know, that was administered over the last couple of months. All right, so let's start with the definition. This is the IRCC's definition that we use to structure the tool to collect data. So the IRCC defines digital capacity as the ability to use digital tools within an organization to enhance service delivery, communication, and coordination. Digital capacity of an organization may be the function of skills and training, e.g. staff, digital literacy, infrastructure, applications like software, cloud computing, and processes such as data analytics, data management, social media use. So we really use that definition to structure the questions as well as the responses that were made available to you. There may be other definitions out there of digital capacity, but this is the one that we opted for. Okay, so what did we find out about you? I just want to give you kind of an overview using the responses here about who answered the exercise here. So as I said earlier, Mainly, you were recipients of IRCC settlement program funding, as we can see, a vast majority, about 96.4%. In terms of the overall, importance of digital capacity in accomplishing your organization's mission and work, there's obviously a clear, we can definitely see the significance and the importance of that. I should say that we're going to be doing some additional analysis on this data. So we'll be able to provide you with some additional kind of crosstabs, but overall, I think what we're seeing here is that digital capacity is important for your work and for the accomplishment of your mission's objectives. As we move to the next slide here, this is a bit of a tricky question, right? Because when we ask the question, does your organization have a digital strategy? Well, what is a digital strategy? Is it a framework? Is it a plan? Is it, having a conversation or the allocation of roles and responsibilities within an organization? So this is broad enough that we wanted to be able to kind of see whether or not, that struck a response that, for you. If you don't have a digital capacity, well, that's kind of an indication that there may not be kind of that coordination or that conversation hasn't taken place inside your organization. Don't know, hard to say. That might be related to the definition or lack thereof of what is a digital strategy, right? But for those who did answer yes, then there's definitely something more that we should dig into here to understand what are the components of a digital strategy, and there's a number of different elements that came out throughout the exercise as well. So let's move towards that. Okay, so where are your activities mainly focused? So this is quite interesting. I mean, we're seeing quite a large concentration, roughly 50% in cities between 100,000 and 1 million. Cities of more than 1 million, a good proportion of you also answered that. And then also seeing a mix here between both urban and rural communities. So, a pretty good spread. And like I said, what we're showing you today are the single tabulations. So, the single frequencies of the results that we collected. But this is the type of analysis that we'll be able to do in coming weeks and report back to you if you choose to receive our updates. But we would be interested in seeing of the organizations that operate in rural communities, are there differences in their specific capacities? So this research, the presentation that we're showing you today won't show you this, but this is something that we intend to do in coming weeks. As we move forward, okay, so let's have a look. I mean, mainly the respondents were at the executive level, but we had program staff as well as others. So that's an interesting one. It's obviously difficult to know what that means. It could be maybe contractual, staff, or staff that maybe doesn't fall within kind of an IT staff or program staff. Maybe people that are more part-time. That were asked to complete the questionnaire on your behalf. So that's an interesting indication here, right, in terms of the coherence and the coordination within an organization in terms of the skill set related to your digital capacity here. How old is your organization? So quite a significant proportion, more than 10 years. With 5 or 10 here in the yellow bar here. So, again, this is the kind of stuff that we'll be able to look at again and seeing, are the organizations that are younger, are they using new tools, or, vice versa, or the organizations that have been operating for a longer period of time, are they the ones that are kind of adopting new technologies and new capacities in order to meet the needs of their organization? But overall, I mean, that gives us a good indication of kind of the maturity of the sector as well. Describing the size of the organization. So quite a number of your organizations are quite large, over 51 employees. Some of the smaller ones here as well. So a good split, as you can see, between the size of organizations. We asked this question here just like as a basic kind of digital capacity question in terms of whether or not you've got a content management system, whether essentially a web page. And so for the organizations that did answer that, it did require a kind of a basic knowledge of what kind of WordPress and Drupal and Joomla are. But this is kind of a minimum kind of bar for kind of digital capacity in terms of content management on the web. But as you'll see in the next few slides, a lot of your organizations are obviously, quite present on the web and use your website for a range of different internal and external tasks as well. Let's just take about 15 seconds for this one if you've got any questions or comments about this first section before we move on to the following section. I realize that this one is not as detailed as the following ones, so let's just give ourselves 15 seconds, whether or not you've got questions or comments, and then we'll continue. All right, let's get to the good stuff. All right, internal tasks. All right, so the way that we've structured the presentation, I've got some kind of key takeaways from the analysis that we did on the results of the exercise that we conducted, and then I'll show you the slides afterwards. So key things that came out, well, email remains the predominant method that SPOs communicate internally, although there is a significant use of cloud storage tools to manage most internal tasks. So this is an interesting one, right? Because then we talk about, well, when we, who administers your cloud storage tools, what are the protocols that are in place for sharing information or data. We also found out that there were, some concerns around sharing information and protecting the privacy and data of clients or recipients of the services that you're administering. So as we use new technologies, then there are some either perceived or real risks in terms of integrating those new capacities within organizations. Social media, mainly Facebook and communication tools, usually applied for external communication purposes like newsletters, also serve to manage staff, like staff and volunteers, and builds awareness of services. So this is quite interesting. I mean, we know that in Canada, we're very big Facebook users comparatively to other countries on the planet. Canada is one of the main users of Facebook, actually. And so it's interesting how we're using Facebook for internal tasks as well in terms of coordinating teams, communication. I would imagine that if we dug a little bit deeper, we'd be looking at different kind of groups where people are sharing content, maybe engaging with one another, discussions that are taking place online with particular topics or even particular stakeholders. So Facebook is quite an important tool for a lot of you. Notable use of video, roughly 41.8% for organizational learning and development. This is an area where there could be probably more documentation, right? If we talk about capacity kind of building, how is video used effectively to transmit knowledge and information inwardly as well as externally. And we know that this is a big trend right now where people don't want to receive huge documents, they'd rather kind of engage with video. While the great majority of SPOs rely on their website to conduct internal tasks, few have the capacity or need to use analytics. So it's one thing to have, great content and a good-looking website that, gets used, but how do we measure that, right? And there were a few or a low proportion of organizations that indicated that they had kind of connected or used analytics where you're able to kind of track, you know, the frequency of use of and the clicks, for example, of different content, how much time people spend looking at one page versus another. So the traffic and, you know, where users of the website or people that are consulting your website are based as well. So there's a lot of analysis that can be done through analytics tools these days. And that's not something that we were seeing that was being utilized by SPOs, that we, at least the ones that completed the questionnaire. Easy to use SMS and text messaging tools are used frequently by SPOs, but there's a limited use of mobile apps, which may be indicative of either limited digital capacity, but you know, it might also be an issue of resources, right? If we just kind of speak openly here, you know, developing an app to develop a you know, a better service, you know, online for your clients or the users of your services, that takes resources, and it can be quite a daunting endeavor to actually kind of mobilize, you know, the tech capacity to be able to run and to develop your own apps for yourselves. So, you know, it's not too surprising that there's a gap there, but there could be opportunities for you know, perhaps tools that could be open source, where the code base could be reused by organizations that serve different or similar functions in the field. So those are some of the key internal tasks, but let's turn to the actual results. So here we go. We've got the, as I mentioned, people management. So the email bar over here. Intranet remains, you know, quite significant. Mailing lists, newsletters. You know, in my mind, like, you know, having worked in the nonprofit sector for a while as well, in my mind, you know, when we design newsletters and use mailing lists, we that those serve kind of external communication purposes, but they do have quite a huge kind of use for internal people management as well. Facebook, as I mentioned before, and cloud storage, which is neat, right? So this is something where we could dig a little bit deeper and understand, well, which cloud storage, excuse me, solutions are you using? And what are the ones that are best suited for your needs? Sometimes technological solutions are more complex and have features that we don't necessarily need. So what are the best tools out there for you? Again, still on internal tasks. So this is organizational learning and development. So email, but this is where kind of video pops up a little bit more, as you saw. And again, you know, website is pretty consistent throughout here, but the video is the one that kind of pops up in this one. In cloud storage, right? So how do we archive content and you know, training materials, and how do we build that kind of architecture of training knowledge and modules internally, and who's responsible for that are important here from a sustainability perspective. To build awareness of services among staff and internal stakeholders, you know, consistent with previous slides, you know, email, website, Facebook are pretty much kind of common here as well. From the internal organizational communication and collaboration, 100% of respondents here use email, not surprising. And again, I mean, I think the things that kind of pop up a little bit more is that we see kind of less emphasis on, compared to the other slides on the website and your intranet, a little bit more on text messaging, which makes sense. So, you know, what are the best practices when we use SMS and text messaging for internal organizational communication and collaboration? There may be some, you know, some further research that could be done in that area. So let's take a pause for questions and comments. If you want to include those in the on the bar on the right, as you kind of open your sidebar with the orange arrow. You can punch in your questions in the questions tab there. So I'll give you 15-20 seconds to be able to do that, and then we'll continue to external tasks. All right, let's continue. So external tasks. So basically a similar range of different options that were provided for different questions, except for a couple of other tools that were added to the available list of responses. So key takeaways, majority of SPOs use their digital capacity to communicate externally, not surprisingly, to advertise events, educate the public, and recruit volunteers. So, you know, there's a lot that's being done to promote and to ensure that there is visibility and kind of discoverability of the work that you're doing through online or digital tools. There is an opportunity for skills and training on fundraising. So fundraising really kind of came up a little bit more here, which is quite interesting because there's quite a booming kind of industry around fundraising platforms for the nonprofit sector. With a wide range of different kind of functionalities out there now. And we know that fundraising now is being linked or associated with issue-based campaigns, for example, or, very, very kind of fine-tuned messaging as well, and used as mobilization or engagement, practices and strategies. So there's a lot that could be, I think, kind of developed on understanding kind of your fundraising needs and the platforms that you're using and how effective those are. Digital roles and responsibilities are shared within SPOs, reflecting perhaps a general use of digital tools, infrastructure, and processes. And we've got a good slide here that I'll show you. There's so SPOs have an established web presence and widespread use of Facebook, mailing lists, and newsletters, as I've mentioned before, not too surprisingly. Video is frequently used to communicate externally, so consistent with the way that video is being used internally as well. But there's a limited use of more technical applications or more complex applications of digital capacity, such as crowdsourcing or data visualization, mapping, or mobile apps. So, we were able to capture some of these best practices in terms of innovation, but crowdsourcing and data visualization and mapping, when they're used effectively, can be quite useful, in communicating and telling your story about kind of the work that your organization is doing, communicating some testimonies in terms of storytelling around the clients or the people that you serve, and also making the case for the impact that you're having through your work. So data visualization and mapping can be quite useful in geolocating, services, but then also kind of demonstrating where people are using your services. So that seemed to be, at least from the results that we collected, kind of an underdeveloped area here in Canada. But let's look at the numbers. So in terms of people management, again, this is all external. Facebook, even more than the previous series of slides on internal tasks. Email, mailing lists. There's a bit of a spike here. Some video, but overall, I think we're seeing with mailing lists and the combination of different tools, a lot of emphasis on how tools can serve to be able to kind of bring people together and manage your teams on the ground. Promoting and building awareness of services. I've mentioned this in the key messages slides. So a wide range of tools here. So in my mind, what becomes interesting is how are these tools coordinated within a digital strategy, right, in accordance with your own organizational goals and objectives, right? So digging a little bit deeper to understand the components of a digital strategy, and how to best kind of accord these different tools and processes, could be worth kind of further investigation. Service delivery, again, from an external task perspective. So, a range of different ways here that are kind of consistent with what we've seen elsewhere in the previous slides. I think we've got an interesting one here, getting feedback from service users, clients, and stakeholders. Again, social media, these like unidirectional tools like kind of newsletters, may not be the ones, the best way of being able to kind of engage in two-way communication with stakeholders, clients, and users. But, how do we do that? Maybe through SMS or, other means as well. But Facebook obviously becomes one. And in my mind, when I look at a slide like that, it's like, who's not able to access, your digital tools to be able to provide you with feedback, and what are the complementary tools that are used? Like, should we have included phone, for example? Is that a way where you have somebody who's, or a helpline, or, also recognizing maybe that there's a couple of other options that could have been added to this list. But, overall, I think it's fairly positive in terms of how digital tools are being utilized. In terms of external communication, so a wide range here of tools, kind of speaks for itself. But again, I think it's the coordination of these different capacities and how they form kind of a sequence of and kind of a holistic kind of approach to your external communication, either not to confuse your external messaging, or to use different tools that are more likely to reach different audiences that you may have, right? Because there must be quite a range of different profiles of different users and stakeholders that you're in contact with. So, which tools are best suited to reach different audiences obviously becomes an issue that I'm sure you're all well aware of. Here are a couple of questions that are a little bit different than the ones that we just showed you. So this is mainly focused on your organization's current capacity to manage digital tools and practices. So, who manages this internally from a human resources perspective? Interestingly, we're seeing, paid, consultants, part-time, or unpaid volunteer support. So combining these, you're looking at close to 45, 46%. So this becomes, comparatively to having internal capacity, and there's probably a correlation between the size of the organization with these bars and maybe some smaller organizations that maybe resort to more kind of paid kind of part-time staff or consultants or unpaid volunteer support. So the ability to be able to retain that type of knowledge within an organization when we're dealing on a volunteer basis becomes critical. And I've had that opportunity as well to work with the Center for Community Organizations of Montreal, and well aware of the challenges that can be faced there in terms of not only retaining knowledge, but making sure that we're not constantly kind of reinventing the wheel and repeating kind of these processes of trying to come up with the best kind of digital tools to meet our needs. So that can be quite a challenge, and actually quite taxing from a kind of a labor perspective as well, with limited time availabilities here. Here, this was more of a kind of why do you, how do you use your digital capacity to communicate externally? I've highlighted some of this earlier. Interesting notes around kind of storytelling and raising funds, advertising events, motivating people into action. So, there's probably like a ladder of engagement, right, when we communicate externally and in the way that we want to mobilize and identify different clients and users and stakeholders, and giving them the ability to kind of be part of the community that you're building locally, and as well as among other SPOs as well. So this gives you a good indication, but certainly, advertising events and educating the public, kind of far-reaching, communication outputs, are one of the priorities here. Let's take about 10, 15 seconds. I keep reducing the time. I went from 30 seconds to 15 seconds. Now I'm giving you 10 seconds. So let's do 15 seconds to come up with questions and comments. Again, you just need to type up your questions in the tab on the right on the margin after opening it with the orange arrow on the right. So let's give ourselves a few seconds to answer that. Okay, so attitudes towards digital capacity. So these are slightly different questions that you'll see. So top of mind concerns with data privacy issues by SPOs may be tied to current gaps in digital capacity internally, especially in data management. So data management can be quite complex. It doesn't necessarily need to be, but obviously with the volume of data that you might be working with, depending on the scale of your organization. If we're looking at organizations that have more than 50 or 55, staff operating in large urban centers or, in complex environments, it's not too surprising that there would be some concerns about the perceived kind of risks around, privacy issues in terms of sharing data and personal information. And there's no, there's no kind of real kind of defined kind of set of like protocols and kind of best practices around this. For some of you that may have attended the Transform the Sector conference that took place in Toronto a few weeks ago, that was hosted and curated by Powered by Data, that was one of the main issues that came out of that event. So accessing access to the internet remains a significant preoccupation for SPOs, and they are a represented precondition, obviously for addressing digital capacity needs. If you don't have access to the internet, then it's difficult to start talking about, cloud storage and, mobile apps and whatnot. So that's something that is we need to remember this in terms of, the inclusion of, not only organizations, but also, clients and stakeholders and, the people that you're working with on the ground as well, and their ability to access the internet. If you're doing a lot of promotion online, but people don't have access to the internet, then obviously there's a disconnect there. So I'm just underlining that because sometimes when we talk about digital capacity, we tend to kind of expect or think that everybody has access to the internet. Well, in fact, that's obviously not the case here. So, just being mindful of that. Although SPOs are extremely concerned with data quality, they are interestingly not as concerned with digital literacy of staff. So this may be attributed to strength of contextual knowledge. So in the sense that, there's a lot of, even if you don't necessarily are following kind of training on digital literacy and how to handle data or, analyze data, my assumption here in kind of seeing these results is that because you're the ones that are working, as frontline organizations and working directly with a range of different stakeholders and communities on the ground, that you know what the data is telling you when you see it. So that's an assumption there, but there's probably a lot more that can be determined from analyzing data with greater capacity internally. So SPOs understand their digital capacity needs, but find it challenging to evaluate the impact of digital capacity. And I'll show you a slide to that effect. It's difficult to measure how well we use our own digital capacity, whether it's even in the tech sector. It's something that's pretty, it's constantly evolving, and there's constantly new technologies that pop up. Developing that matrix that enables you to kind of measure success in terms of the effective way that you're using your digital capacity. There's probably a bigger conversation there that's worth having within the social sector more broadly. The availability of hardware is relatively of low concern. However, maintaining office IT systems are a preoccupation. So, we know where to find, the software and we know how to find, the hardware. So having access to computers or having, basic kind of hardware that enables you to do your work. But it's the capacity, and this goes to the part-time consultants or the paid or unpaid volunteers that are supporting you. How do we make sure that once we have the hardware and software that's maintained over time? If that's not done, then that can create a lot of problems. If licenses aren't renewed, if a new software is not purchased, compatible for software, that can cause a lot of headaches here. The availability I've already said that. So sharing data collected by SPOs ranks highest in shared digital capacity experience. So this is quite an interesting one. And if we kind of relate the second to last bullet to the first one, so as we share data, that's kind of a highest ranking experience, but data privacy issues is one of the highest ranking concerns. So, how do we reconcile that? There's a big conversation here that needs to be had, and primarily from the perspective of the people that you're serving yourselves, right? I think there's a certain obligation when we collect data about people, that there's a certain kind of a respect or an understanding that data isn't, or that data will be protected. So how do we ensure that? I think that's an issue that kind of reflects the values in terms of the work that's being done by your sector. There's an opportunity to build an experience of SPOs supporting each other and sharing internet content, IT technical skills, and infrastructure here. So kind of the pooling together resources, pooling together expertise. There's probably a kind of a economy of scale here that hasn't been as documented as it could be. So let's look at a few slides here that helped us to kind of tell the story. So in the context of your organization, how concerned are you about the following? Extremely concerned is in purple to the right, going to never concerned. So these are frequencies and not percentages, okay, importantly. So data privacy, as I mentioned. So data privacy, data quality, data management, these are obviously interconnected, right? So there's like I said, a big conversation here. Being hacked is not fortunately a concern, or at least you may not know that it's happening. But it sounds like it's not. It seems like it's not a real issue. This is the link that I was making with maintaining office IT systems, which might be a bit of actually a significant concern here. And then having up-to-date kind of software and hardware availability, not as much of a concern, and access to the internet being significant as well. For some, right? So it either is or it isn't. Okay, moving on. So this was a little bit of a kind of a tricky question to ask, because we could have asked you to kind of rank, the way that you're sharing your digital capacity, but instead what we did is that we asked you to pick the digital capacity method that proved most useful in terms of sharing it. So out of this list here. So an interesting spread, data collected by other newcomer settlement organizations. So again, touching on data quality, data management, basically the data ethics of sharing data, but it's something that is being done right now. So there's probably kind of a self-awareness and knowledge that there needs to be kind of protocols that are in place here. Otherwise, data management expertise is being shared, perhaps out of necessity or maybe on a project-to-project basis in collaboration with other organizations. Internet content, so cross-posting. So we saw from the kind of external communication slides earlier that there was a range of tools that was being used here. So, there's good kind of collaboration around that within the sector. IT technical skills and knowledge, probably worth digging some more here. Platforms and websites. So again, we've been able to capture some examples of your shared digital capacity experiences. And this may relate to kind of joint projects or joint, campaigns, perhaps related to fundraising, where you're sharing platforms and websites as well. So how that goes about, how those projects and how that shared capacity is negotiated and established on a project-to-project basis is something that could require more investigation. Here we go. So top priority for improvement when we look at how you're able to respond to a specific organizational need and how to not only respond but develop and address the gaps in, for example, in your digital capacity in order to meet that need. So if we look at, let's say that there's a particular kind of issue that arises in terms of addressing gaps in existing programs and services, then what's the kind of the process that leads you to identify that gap and that need, and then look at what tools and what digital capacity you have available to you, and then formulate your response, manage and implement, and then evaluate. So assess digital capacity needs and assets. That seems to be something that you've got a fairly good handle on, although the needs some improvement in green is fairly high. Formulating your response, fairly good, but as we move closer to the evaluation of the impact of digital capacity, so that might be an issue around just time constraints, not being able to kind of build in the time for that kind of evaluation of that process in terms of responding with the digital capacity to a particular need. Potentially there's another there's another need that comes up that kind of inhibits you to spend your required time to do this, or it's a methodology issue. So there could be a range of factors attributed to this. I'll skip over these because we also asked for a few follow-up questions where for respondents who had indicated that needs a lot of improvement or needs some improvement in the previous question, this one here. So we collected a number of key quotes here to be able to kind of add a little bit more kind of texture to the responses that we got. So I'll let you kind of read through those as you download our presentation. So let's take a few seconds, 10, 15 seconds if you have any questions or comments about this section, and then we'll conclude with our final section. All right, let's keep going. So your experience, again, some qualitative data that we collected. So this was more around kind of innovative practices and approaches involving your digital capacity. And we asked you to kind of send us some ideas of, best practices in terms of, a project, a practice, or a tool. And there are some examples here, some key ones here. So we'll let you go over these, but quite a rich, range of experiences that we were able to get through this exercise for IRCC. Innovative practices. So again, we're not going to go, and visit all these websites today, but these are examples that respondents wanted to share for the benefit of the community. So you'll be able to consult these as well. So we really wanted this research to be a resource for you as well. Again, this is mainly connected to kind of shared data capacity with other newcomer settlement organizations. As we saw in the earlier slide, there were quite a range of different ways that digital capacity was being shared. And so these are some of the examples that were done here. Okay, so let's keep moving for that, because I want to get to maybe some of the questions that you may have sent us. Future IRCC support. All right. So how does that play in terms of recommendations, in terms of key findings from this, and the impact that it could have for IRCC and the priorities that it sets for supporting the sector? So this is interesting, right? Because we asked a question here, understanding that digital capacity may not be the only way that IRCC can support your work. There was the first slide that we showed you from the research, indicated that it's very important or extremely important for you, to have good digital capacity, or that digital capacity has a very important role in terms of your mission and your work. However, there was also recognition that it's not the only way that IRCC can direct its support to SPOs. So I think this is an interesting slide because we see kind of a nuanced picture. We even have some organizations that are saying, well, yeah, not so much actually. It's not important at all, but mainly kind of on the right hand side of the of that scale. So quite important, but maybe not at the expense of supporting kind of labor market participation or language development or building inclusive communities. So I think that's a key message here for IRCC, that it's good to focus on digital capacity, but not at the expense of other areas as well. Or to do it in a complementary way, right? Maybe digital capacity can enhance kind of language development, or connect to building inclusive communities. So it's not just a question of supporting training for staff or leaders in your organization on data management, for example. There's a lot more to this. There's quite a range and complex set of needs here in the sector. How important are the following ways that IRCC could support the development of newcomer settlement organizations' digital capacity? So we wanted to identify, a range of different options and get you to prioritize these. Again, these aren't percentages; these are frequencies. So there's a lot of extremely important ways that IRCC could invest in SPO digital capacity. Project funding specifically for digital capacity development ranks really, really high, as well as supporting digital skills development for staff and leaders. There's a lot more nowadays that enables us to kind of look at experiences on how to train and how to support like data literacy, or data management, or using different tools. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be done from a pedagogical kind of perspective. And one of our recommendations to IRCC is don't develop those programs in isolation from from the sector itself. From a technology kind of organization like ours, design with and not just for the users of programs and initiatives. And especially if you're looking at project funding specifically for digital capacity development, then this needs to be an inclusive and engaging process, so that what is being offered in terms of support by IRCC is really tailored to your needs. So one of our key messages is, use this research, but use it as, part of a conversation with stakeholders like yourselves. Next slide. Any other feedback that we'd like to share with us? So some key things that came out, which I'll let you read through once you download the presentation. So I'm just going to turn to my colleague here to see if there's any questions that were sent as we were doing the presentation. Let me just check in briefly. So what do we got? Okay. Yeah, okay, so there's a few. So let me just go through these. So overall, very interesting research. Thanks for sharing. That was one. Number two, more of a comment. It's very interesting to learn how people defined having a CMS as either just having an organizational website or whether it was used for internal operation. This second group of slides helps clarify that, so that's great. Are you able to make a recommendation for best practices? Different person asked this question. Okay, so like we want to be kind of available to you as well in terms of following up on these results. And let me just kind of go to that. How's the usage of SMS or text messaging in serving clients? Is that widely used in caseload follow-up or scheduling appointments with clients? Again, we don't have the granularity of that type of kind of responses, but when you're indicating things like this through these questions, this is something that we can kind of put forward in our final recommendations for further research. Okay, so just looking at here. Okay, sorry, there's a bunch of different questions. Are you able to collect data on privacy and protection of personal client info. So I'm not sure how we could do that through this exercise. Within the organizations, here's another question. Within the organizations, who took part in the research? Who responded to these questions? Frontline workers, managers, executives. So that was one of the slides in the first section about you. It was mainly executives, but there was some division here also with project leads and others. Majority was executives. Another question here, were you able to collect data on type of internet access, high-speed, fiber, dedicated IT support, maintenance, upkeep, repair? No. So the answers that you see are the ones that we were able to collect. But knowing that you're interested in that is something that we can factor in to the recommendations. When talking about video, does that incorporate YouTube as part of the information or using as internal training tool? So YouTube is, I mean, one of the tools, right, that can be used, but there are others as well, and we know this from, you know, kind of the expansion of the kind of pedagogical kind of, you know, an education, online education, you know, different tools that are being done here. So, you know, that's something that could be better documented for you as well. Any tips, another question here, any tips for SPOs on how to complain to the Canadian anti-spam legislation, CASL? We hear that nonprofit organizations are not exempt and can face serious legal implications after July 1st if anyone decides to sue them. So a very important question, and actually I had heard about this, but again, this is, now that you've mentioned it, we'll include that in our kind of notes and recommendations for IRCC. I had a specific question here on in number 10. What does the purple bar stand for? So purple bar stands for needs a lot of improvement. So that's the answer to that question. A couple of questions about SurveyMonkey. So there's SurveyMonkey, for those of you who don't know it. That's a online survey kind of platform that's used quite commonly. It's fairly affordable. There's also Google Forms for those of you who are familiar with it. So there's online survey, SurveyMonkey go under analytics. I wouldn't necessarily go put it under analytics, but there are some analytics that can be derived from SurveyMonkey. So, you know, analytics would be if you search Google Analytics, what you can do is add, you know, it's basically what's called a plug-in that you add to your website that enables you to track the type of data in terms of frequency of uses and you know, traffic and, you know, where people are using your website from. So Google Analytics is a good reference for those of you who want to learn more about analytics and how to connect that to your website. A couple of other questions here. How's the usage of SMS or text messaging in serving clients? Is that widely used in caseload follow-up or scheduling appointment with clients? So I think I've answered that before, and that, again, we don't have the granularity of those answers. And here I'm just moving stuff around in my list of questions. Are you hoping to establish a standardized digital capacity protocol that all SPOs could use? So that's work that could be done, and I think, you know, I referenced Transform the Sector earlier in the webinar, and that's certainly something that was kind of a top of mind issue. And, you know, that's something that we'll put in our recommendations as well. Is there future training programs for settlement workers locally? This is also something that we need to put to the IRCC itself, right? So I'm not privy to exactly how IRCC intends to use these results, but you know, I think in my mind, you know, like the webinar that we gave to you today was a first step in engaging with SPOs in the sector. And, you know, hopefully IRCC will continue that conversation with you directly as well. Just looking at some other other questions that came in. Okay, so I think that's it. I think that's what we've got. Let me just turn over to the, we have a short poll that we want to make sure that you're able to answer. If we can just put that up now, we've got 3 quick questions that we'd like you to complete before we kind of tune off for today. So let's put that up. We want to make sure that we've captured your needs here. So please, before you log off, if you could just answer 2 quick questions. So did the presentation accurately describe the digital capacity needs of the newcomer settlement sector? If you could just take 1 second to answer that, that'd be great feedback for us to make sure that we covered the range of issues that are of concern to you, and as well as the opportunities for the IRCC to support your work. Let's give ourselves a couple of seconds. All right. Let's see about the results. Okay, so very good, pretty good, excellent. Okay, so we weren't completely off the mark, and it sounds like the majority of you felt that we were able to capture most of your main preoccupations and your needs. Next question, please. Okay, would you like to receive additional analysis from Open North in coming months as it continues to crunch these results? So yes, no, maybe. And if so, we'll quickly move to the last slide after we show you the result of this question here, because what we want to be able to do is, make sure that, if you do want additional analysis from us, so if yes, all right, so big majority or maybe, depends, right? Keeping your options open. So the last slide, please, if we could put that up. We've got our email. Okay, so if you'd like to receive more analysis, please email us at info@opennorth.ca indicating the appropriate name and email address of the person to whom we should address and send more results. And we'll be working with a prof from McGill University who's going to help us kind of crunch these numbers further. So thank you very much for your time. That's the end of our webinar, and very much appreciate everybody who participated today, as well as the time that you took to complete the online primary data collection tool. Okay, thank you so much.